Hello, welcome to part 3 of Functional Music Theory on Guitar, and right to the score today. So I want to go through a few things with you with the score. We have all the chords on top. All the chords pretty much are in the same key as what this lesson is in. It's in key of C major. So key of C major is fully represented here. Full score in terms of all guitar ideas that we'll discuss. We got our fretboard diagram over here. So you'll see things highlighted within the first 3 frets. That's where everything is located for each of the chords and also the riffs that we have here. Okay, so we have the beginning of all the chords. If I can highlight some of these, that'd be great. Let's see if I can do this. There we go. So we got our C chord, C, E, and G. Spell out the C chord. On to D minor. So D minor has D, F, and A as the spelling. And we got E minor. So there's a recap of the first couple of parts of this series of functional music theory. E minor, E, G, B spells out the E minor chord. You can see everything represented. Again, a lot of this stuff will be highlighted when it goes through the score. You'll see it in the fretboard diagram. Everything will be kind of lit up. So that's going to help a lot for trying to memorize the names of the notes. All right, F, A, and C, spell out your F chord. It's a F/C. That just means the letter C is the lowest sound of the chord. And of course, it's doubled because you have the highest sound of the chord right there, letter C. So F, A, and C spell out your F chord. G major is next. This really should have the pinky there, like that. So that's all good to go. So G, B, D is the spelling of your G chord. Okay, and you can see there's 2 D's in this chord. That's why the ring finger is here. Normally, when you play this G chord, typically when you first start out, the ring finger is actually where the pinky is. So you would have the B string open. So I chose to put it here. It's a popular way of playing the chord. All right, A minor is next. A, C, E, spell out the A minor chord. Standard way of playing the A minor chord. And lastly, B half diminished. So it's a B 7th chord. It's a minor 7th chord. It's actually half diminished. All the tones. Pretty much like what they call a minor third away, except for the last 2 notes. B, D, F, A would be the spelling of this chord. F to A is a different interval type of thing. So that's something later on we'll talk about. We'll go into intervals. But the main thing with all these chords is the sounds that you get from them. The spelling is important, but of course over time, the more and more you see the spelling of the chord, the more and more you get used to what's inside the chord and where you can play it based on the fretboard diagram and where everything's located. The B, in this case, the B half diminished chord is B, F, A, and D, as you saw in the chord diagram. So those are the core 7 chords. And then these 3 here, the G5/D, the C, which is still the same C chord, and the G/B. That's a pretty popular chord. And we'll get into why that is when we get down to this section, which has all of the different single notes that you can play to form like riffs and some melody ideas. So the basis of this particular part is we have chords and we have melodic application of the chord. So playing what's called arpeggios. Okay, so we're taking each note of the chord and playing it separately like you would sing a melody. That's basically the heart of an arpeggio, which gives you melodic ideas if you want to write a melody. These kinds of approaches, when we get down to this section here, when you get down to this part, this gives you maybe some melodic content that you can use, or a riff you could use for a guitar part, or if you want to double that guitar part. There's lots of ways you can go with something like this, which is really exciting. All right, so this chord, the G5/D. So G5, the way it's spelled out, it's G and D. So the D is 5 letters away from G in the music alphabet, because once you hit G in the music alphabet, you return back to A. So that's something that we'll go further in if we discuss power chords more at length. That's kind of what this chord is. It's a G5 power chord with a D in the bottom of the chord, which is the lowest sound of the chord. So you'd be starting this on your open D string, the open G strings included, and then of course the fretted notes are D and G, and that's where they're located. And again, all this will be reinforced by the fretboard view that we have that shows you the letters. Okay. And we got the C chord. We know what that is. Another G chord type is the G/B. That means it's a G chord, and the B is the lowest. Whoops, I lost it. The B is the lowest sound of the chord. Okay, and we're playing just the inside 4 strings, very much like the B half diminished chord. The next to in this case, the last chord of the chord collection in C major. Okay, so there it is. So we got G, B, and D for the G chord, and of course you can see where the letters are in terms of the spelling. They're all located here. B is the fretted note, second fret of the A string, third fret of the B string, which I really like to use. You don't have to use the middle finger. I tend to use the ring finger here because really this chord is an offshoot of this one right here. Okay, so if I take the index finger, ring finger, and just play those two fretted notes with the two open strings in between, I get the G/B chord. Okay, so that's kind of where that chord came from. I decided to take that particular voicing and change it when you get down to, where's the GB? Right here. This measure right in here is where you have the GB chord. Okay, so I took what was available to me in terms of the chords and decided to tweak it. So let me play this whole thing through, and then maybe I'll give you like a playing demonstration as well towards the end. So let's hear the entire thing. You get to hear all the sounds. We're at 50 beats per minute. So 50 beats per minute could feel kind of fast, maybe not, especially when you get down to the eighth notes here. That's what these guys are. We'll discuss a little bit about the rhythm too in this particular part. So there's a good amount of stuff going on here. So I want to try to keep it as basic as I can. That's really the functional part of functional music theory, is to keep it simple and be able to use this stuff to create something or to recreate something by ear that you've heard and you want to try to copy it. Okay. So here's the entire score from the beginning. Let's listen and see what it sounds like. Okay, so before I move on to the next part, you can see these symbols here, right in here. These are repeat signs. So you just heard these chords played through 2 times. That's what that symbol means. And the chords are played in quarter notes. So you have one, you can hear the click in the beginning. So everything keeps in time with the click. So right from the start, if I go back to the beginning, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's the quarter note tempo that's clicking out. Okay. When we get down to these guys, which is next, we have the half notes. So we're going to have the sound sustained for 2 clicks. Okay, so you're going to hear the sound being played on the first click. The next click goes by, nothing's happening, but the sustain, the chords are ringing out over that click. Okay, so that's a little bit of the rhythmic component to the half notes. Let's hear it. Okay, so now 2 things about this chord progression. The C, the F, the G chord, that's known as a 1-4-5 chord progression. That just means we take the first quarter of the key that we're in, which is in this case the C chord, 4 chords away from that, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the F chord, so that's the 4 chord. And if we have the chord right after it, that's 5. So we're just counting up numerically from one chord to the next. And that becomes the lingo for describing the chord progression. One chord's progressing to the next, but we're pulling out these chords from the collection that we have here. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chord. Okay, so that's the amount of chords we have in the key, and then the 1 chord would be the C chord again. Okay, so this is known as a 1, 4, 5, 1 chord progression. Okay, again, some terminology being thrown around, but it really gives you an idea of like the distance between one chord and the next, and that becomes almost like a standard chord progression you hear in songs pretty much every day, just that we give a name to it so we can kind of codify it, whatever word you want to use for that, to kind of give ourselves some information that we can play with, literally. Okay, and then I did the same kind of approach here, A, D minor, E minor, which is like the 1-4-5 chord progression, but it's in a minor collective. So all the chords we have are minor, right? Later on, the E minor chord will become what's called an E7 chord, but that's not part of this part. Okay, so the sound progression is a little different than the C, F, G. You're going to hear with A minor, D, and E, it sounds a little different. Let's play it from here. Now in the next section here coming up, we get to mix and match those together, but we get a different type of chord progression. We have a C, which is the 1 chord. We have a 6 chord right here, a 2 chord, a 5 chord, and a 1 chord. And again, this just comes from the collection on top. C would be the 1 chord we start with. A minor is the next, which is the 6 chord. So it's 6 chords away from the first one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're just going by distance from one chord to the next. And then D minor, wrong measure. D minor is the 2 chord. 1, 2. There it is. So you have 1, 6, 2, and 5. The G chord. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You get the idea, right? So we have the 1, 6, 2, 5 chord progression, and then back to the 1 chord, right? Let's see what that sounds like. We're in half note rhythm. Same thing here as it was in measures. What was this? 4, 5. Measures 4 and 5. The distance of the chords is kind of laid out already. So we're kind of mixing and matching, but the numbers change because now we're playing a different kind of chord progression. Okay, and these are some of the standard chord progressions you would start with, and then of course you can take it anywhere you want. So let's hear it from this measure. The 1, 6, 2, 5, 1 chord progression. It's going to repeat. Okay, now in the next section that's coming up, I decided to change the rhythm. So we have eighth notes. So eighth notes, what happens with that is we play twice within one click. So if you hear the click going by, what's going to happen is we're going to play twice inside the click, but the notes are evenly spaced out. Okay, so the chord note is what's clicking off. These guys here in these chord stacks, that's how a chord note looks. In the tablature, you wouldn't know that. You just see everything kind of stacked up on top of each other. If it was just tablature, we wouldn't really know specifically, if it's chord note, it could be an eighth note. We don't know because a lot of tablatures don't have the rhythms attached to it unless you go into like Guitar World magazine where they have intabulation of the sounds but with rhythm on top of the tablature section. So here you get both. This is the way I learned I learned music in terms of guitar playing through this layout, manuscript and tablature. So the manuscript gives you more definitive information than just tablature alone. But what they do now, of course, is they actually include the rhythm on top of the tablature. So you still got to spend time working out rhythms. But that's very important because it gives you specifics about the song you're learning. That's really important because you need that for your ear to be able to be attentive in listening and also comparative in listening, which works out into the creative mode as well. So too much of the reading can be good or bad depending on the player. So here it is. This measure here gives you the eighth notes. What I did was I took the chord progression from here, and this is measure 4 and 5, if I'm correct. So I took the progression from here as a chord stack and just decided to play out the notes separately, and everything's moving in an ascending direction with some skips, as you can see, between the C and the F chord. It's a skip going down, going up, and then skip down again, going up, skip down, going up. So it's kind of has a pattern to it. It has a sort of a contour that looks similar from chord to chord. And let's hear it. Okay, so that just gives you an idea for maybe a melody that might feel a little too fast, that might be a little too slow. It just depends. So it just gives you sort of sounds for thought, I guess, to put it sort of plainly. The idea is that you have a certain collection that you can play with, and then you can create from that. So with some sort of small terminology thrown in. But the main thing again is the sound, and some of the terms might be useful for you. Like, oh, I decided to take this melody and keep it the same so that each chord has the same direction because I heard it that way. So these are just presentations. You can take these ideas, do whatever you want. You can do repetitions of notes. You can take away notes. You can add things in. I mean, it's all up to you, but you need a starting point to be able to do that. So this kind of hopefully provides that for you. So now here in this next collection, I decided to do the arpeggios again, and you get 2 beats per chord, which is kind of what's happening. You just heard that just a moment ago. I decided to keep that theme for anything that looks like this. You know, these eighth notes played in arpeggios. Basically, the chords are being played as separate tones. So, and you could probably pretty much get away with keeping everything down, just picking through the notes with your right hand. So it doesn't happen like that all the time, but for this example, you could probably get away with doing that, except yeah, pretty much all the way through. So I'll give you a demonstration towards the end. You could see me play it, and you'll get an idea. All right, so this measure here, C chord, the 1 chord, the 6, the 2, the 5 chord, and then it repeats back to the 1 chord, then to the 6 again, of course the 2 chord, and the 5 chord. So let's see what that sounds like. Different approach now to the arpeggios. Okay, so it would typically go back to the 1 chord, you know, after that G5/D fancy term chord. So that's something that as you play through these things and you're listening to them, you know, in both the attentive and comparative ways of listening, ideas start to come up. You may hear certain things moving in a certain direction. So even though I presented this in a certain scoring with the way the notes are laid out, you could do whatever the hell you want with it. You can completely go crazy and do, you know, what you will. You might hear something different, and that's a good thing. You want to be able to hear something. That's really the idea of the functionality of this, being able to hear and work with that. All right, so here is the next part. C chord, going to the F/C, and then the B half diminished chord is next, then the G chord, and then the 1 chord. So let's hear what that sounds like. All right, so with this chord right here, we add a little bit of tension into the mix. So that's something too that's part of creating music. You want to have what they call consonants and dissonance. Consonance is like the nice sort of pleasant sound type of thing we hear with a note combination or a chord combination. In this case, we have the F chord moving to this B minor half diminished chord, which provides a little tension before we get to this chord, the G chord, which sounds pleasant as compared to the one before it. So that's part of music too, hearing tension and resolution in any order. It could be the resolution type of pleasant sound going first, and then the tension comes in. That's really what music's all about. So so that's something that's now incorporated. Finally, we actually get to use that B half diminished 7th chord, that minor half diminished 7th chord. Okay. Again, fancy terminology. As we go into other parts of functional music theory, we'll get to hear and actually discuss that idea of consonance and dissonance. It's really, to put it in a nutshell, it's pleasant consonance, tension, dissonance. That's basically what it is. Okay. And that's the deal with that. Then I took the same chord progression and played it out here. Let's hear it in this context. Okay. Sorry. So there you go. That's the whole of this particular part. is hearing things played as chord stacks, the collection going first, of course, in measures 2 and 3, 4 and 5. We get the 1, 4, 5 chord progression with the major chords. Next on to the next part, 1, 4, 5 with the minor chords. Even though the A minor chord is 6, we have the 2 and the 3. It could be a 6, 2, 3 chord progression. I just decided to kind of term it 1, 4, and 5. So you have the sort of polarity between the major chords and going to the minor chords in the same distance from chord to chord. But if you get technical, when you start working in the next part, you could go and name the chords whatever you want numerically as a way of organizing things. But in the aspect of creating something, and the mindset of creating something, you can do whatever you want. That's really the thing. You have a certain foundation, and then from that foundation, you create something from that, having a sort of I guess like a roadmap, and then you can do what you want to that. So it's like the idea of learning the rules, then you break the rules. That's kind of what it is, right? And that's the heart of creativity. Starting with the foundation of something, you gotta have to have something to spring off of, and then you just do what you will with the information provided. Okay, so that's again the functional music theory. A little bit of terminology, and then you just take that and run with it. And as everything played through, coming back to the fretboard view, you can see everything gets lit up, right? So whatever you want to play through, whether it's the chord stacks, you can look to this to see what you have. This line here is your low E string. That's if you're sitting behind your guitar and you look straight down to your guitar. That's the first really thick string that you see. And of course, on the other side is the first E string. Closest to the floor when you're sitting behind your guitar, the really thin string, that's your top E string. So bottom E string gives you all the bass sounds. And when you look at chord stacks, for instance, you look from the bottom up, right? So you're going from C, E, G, C, E. That's the collection right there. C, E, G, C, E. And you can see here on the bottom, 3rd fret, 2nd fret, open string, 1st fret, open string. You read from the bottom up. And when you hear these sounds being played, like over here, we're working from the 5th string, the 4th string, 3rd string, 2nd string, right? From the low strings up to the higher strings. You can see the notes are moving up, right? So if we're going to continue my mouse and move like this, you can see the mouse is moving up the screen, right? And then there's times where you have jumps going down. Yeah, get over here, you're moving down. So we're going from, in this case, in this measure, the D minor measure, from an F down to the D open string. So we're going from a higher string, a thinner string, very high pitched string, jumping down to a lower pitched string. Okay, that's moving in a downward direction. You can see with the manuscript, the notes are jumping down. You can see it also too in the tablature. But now we're going from F to D. We're not just going from 1 to 0, which doesn't really tell you a whole lot. It just tells you where to go. But the notes are F and D, which, of course, if you listen to music, that's the main part of what you hear. You're hearing letter names being played on an instrument, in this case, the guitar. So that's why I want to include and keep the fretboard diagram so you can get into the idea of learning where the notes are on your guitar, not just playing through the numbers, like sort of playing dot to dot kind of thing, which is a bit of a dumbing down technique. The idea is you want to be able to know what's under your fingers, because you're gonna hear that in the songs you're listening to. And of course, if you create songs, you want to know what the sound is called after the fact. Okay, so, and that doesn't weigh you down in terms of music theory. Oh, it's so crazy. The idea is that you're taking a sound and being able to identify the sound, not just with the number, because that's, if you're playing at 15th fret, on the E string, what is that called? Well, there it is. That's not 15th fret, it's 13th fret. 15th fret's right here. There's a G there, same as 3rd fret. You add 12 to 3, you get 15. So the note repeats 12 frets higher than where it is. And that's the idea. Over time, the more and more you do it, it gets you more and more adept at knowing what your guitar is about, and that helps you create as well, because then you can codify that. You can actually keep a record of it like this. If you got a software program, you can notate things, create your own scores. There's too much that can be discussed, but I don't want to go too far into that. That's a whole other part down the road. But the main thing is, you can see we have chord stacks. We can play them in different ways with different rhythms. We can approach the chords played single notes to create riffs, like I mentioned, or melodies. So take the information, run with it, okay? So let me get my guitar. I'm going to probably stop the share screen scene, if I can do that. Yes, I can. Stop that. All right, so. And let's move this down a little bit so you can see a bit better. Okay. So the chords going through, we have the C chord, we have, that's the 1 chord, the 4 chord. All right, you can hear in the scoring, it sounds like this, everything being played at the same time. So when you go to play through the chords, you know, a fast right hand technique going through that is the way to go. Just let it run. Let me back up a little bit. And the G chord. Okay, now I'm gonna do a disclosure too in terms of the chord progression. So don't feel you have to go right into these charts right away. If you're having a problem with a certain chord movement in the chord progression, definitely take the chords and spend a little more time with them. If it's a hard change, it's hard to speak today too. So the idea is pair things up. If you're having a hard time with playing, pair things together. Just do 2 things at once and then go for 3. Like, you know, once in a while you'll run to a chord progression. Every so often that causes difficulty. So if you have a way of working that out, I go with chord pairs because it's easier to work with 2 things than it is to do 3 or 4 things. All right, G chord and the C chord. So as you play through the sounds before you even jump into the score, you may find yourself going into a different area and just playing for the sake of playing, which is fantastic. That's really the idea too with the functional music theory approach, is taking information and just playing. You know, that's really what it's all about with the instrument. Taking a sound and using that immediately. That's really the idea of the functional theory with presenting the information as I am in the score, is that you can take it and run with it. Now, if I go through the entire collection from the very top of the page, take your time with it. C major, excuse me, D minor, E minor can be played 2 different ways. You'll see in the chord diagram, E minor is played with index and middle finger. You can also go with middle finger, ring finger for the chord. It just depends on where you're going. Fingerings are subjective, so you can change the fingering depending on what's being played at the moment and where you're going to. So, and also what comes before a certain chord. So it all works out where you're trying to make decisions about what feels logical in terms of fingering. And that's something that I learned as a player from my teacher. Even though he wrote a certain fingering down for me, that's the way he plays it, you know, and he found himself changing fingerings over time because of different things that happen within a score. So it's not concrete. It really comes back to the playing, right? So you can change the fingering in the E minor chord in this case to that, if that feels better to play through. Like when you do the A minor, D minor, E minor bit, you can see where my middle finger is. My middle finger just runs through the 2nd fret area, so I might decide rather than doing E minor this way, that might work pretty good going back to the A minor chord. So the 2 finger right there is playing an E. So for E minor, if I go back to from the 5 chord to the 1 chord, that feels pretty good. For the middle finger is actually just hanging out, it's not moving at all. So if I was to go like this, that might work pretty well too, because now I have 2 fingers moving in the same direction. Whereas if I just kept this finger down, and I move that finger that way for the A minor chord. So that's another whole other area to talk about in a lesson video, is fingering and, you know, what seems to make sense. So these are things you can approach when you start to create. You may have a certain chord change in your creation of taking this information and making a song with it. And you go, you know, I'm getting stuck on that part and I don't know what the problem is. Just look at the fingering. Maybe the fingering is the issue. So long story long, you have freedoms to change fingerings, even with something like what I'm presenting today. If a fingering doesn't work and it's causing problems for changing, just make a change in the fingering and you might find a solution shows up really quickly. Okay, so 1 chord with the majors, F chord with the C in the bass. Actually, I included an E string in there. That sounds kind of nice. I decide to lift out the finger. So again, like when I start playing with something like this, immediately I start experimenting. And that's really the thing too, is application of information. That's where the functionality comes in, okay? 1, 4, 5 in the key of G, C, excuse me. G is the next chord. Now I decide to take my fingers and take notes away and put them back in. So again, it's completely endless, right? The main thing is the C, F, G chord. That's the progression in the score. It really depends on how you play it. You could do the half note rhythm that's in the score. 2, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Same with the minor chords. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 time. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I made a little, errant sound right there. That's all part of the process, right? If you have a certain sound that kind of sneaks in you weren't intending to hear or play, go with it. You might actually be able to use that in a creative context, or a mistake is just a mistake. So however you want to approach that. So the other thing I want to demonstrate before I call it, here we go. Let's see. The arpeggios, yeah. So if I go to that part, let me go back to the camera. If I can get back to, here we go. Okay, so if I go into that section, I think that was the collection of notes. Yeah, I think that was it. Oh, actually, that's the minor chord progression. Let's see. Yeah, actually, I didn't really include for the minor chord progression. I didn't really actually go into the 1, 4, 5 in the minor chord collective. So that's interesting too. So that's something that even though it's not in the score, the major chord progression is. That's all there. We have all that set up. Now if I go to that part, I'm going to get out of this for a second. Let's go back. Yeah, so I played that one as. Even that little hammer-on part was unintentional. So I decided to play the open A string first and then throw that note in. So again, just something that's unintentional. If you're going through a certain thing like I'm presenting today and you go to play through it and something funny like that happens, it's like, okay, that's kind of cool. I'll stick with that. And that's what's in the score. So when you get to the G chord, it's not the full chord, by the way. That's the other thing too when you work through a score, even though you see the name of the chord on top, check out what the notes are on the bottom. So you may not need to play the entire, because it's really focusing in on the bottom 4 strings. From what the notes in the manuscript and the tablature say, you don't need to finger the entire chord. That's something to keep in mind when you go through those arpeggio bits, when you play the notes one at a time, even though the chord name is on top. That's what the arpeggio is, but it's not the entire chord from the chord collection on top of the score. Okay, so keep that in mind because you don't want to make the fingering difficult. Again, going back to fingering. Okay, so it's a good amount to discuss in this particular score. Actually, can you guys even see the score? Let me go back for a second. All right, sorry. I think I've been flashing to the score for my own benefit. So here it is. So you can notice the A minor, D minor, E minor. I didn't include anything like this for those chords. So maybe I'll rectify the score and I'll present the score as a playthrough video like I did for another riff study that I put up. You'll be able to see it, and I'll include a link to that at the end of this video. I actually did a playthrough video of a riff study in C major, playing through all the chords. From the top of the page here, all the collection of chords except for these 3 at the end. I did a little riff study that I'll include that you can click on at the end of the video. Okay, so I didn't leave. I actually didn't include the A minor, D minor, E minor chord in this fashion. So the next progression, the 1, the 6, the 2, the 5 chord, I'll give you a demonstration of that. So let me just go through it myself. I said open B in there. Oh, okay. Yeah, I actually kept that as open B. Okay, let me stop the share. And if I can do it, yes, I can. All right, so in that section, so that's interesting because the picking part's going to change a little bit. You could go into when you play these picked out bits, most of it is all, you know, right hand moving towards the floor. With the 1, 6, 2, 5 chord progression, there's changes of direction. So I'm actually uppicking that note, which brings the right hand down to the 5th string from the 2nd string. Now with that, that's another part where if you want to pair up certain things, like whether it's strumming a chord or arpeggiating the chords in this case, you may want to pair certain things together. You may want to do just the first 2 chords. I'm actually hearing a little bit of that song Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. So that's not how it goes, but I'm hearing, again, doing this attentive comparative thing. You may play certain things in this particular part of the functional music theory series, in this case part 3. You may hear a certain thing from playing a certain way. So when you pair things up, you might hear a certain chord progression from a tune. It just depends on how you play it. So I decided to keep everything as 8th notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, in this case, I decided to change the fingering for that next collection. Sound like doo-doo today. Okay, so that's the whole collection of that, the 1, 6, 2, 5 chord progression, played in that fashion. So the right hand's changing, so you can change direction, or if you want to keep everything the same, you can. It's all up to you how you want to approach it. I didn't really indicate any right hand direction with the playing, so that could be up to you, and that can come down to fingering as well. So that's something that I do in terms of playing through something like I just did. But you can actually go into the fingerings any way you want. It's really up to you what you want to do. Okay, so moving on to the next to last, we have our chord progression, the C, the F, C, B, half diminished, G, C chord. So that's pretty much self-explanatory from the way everything else was proceeding. Again, if certain chord changes come up that are difficult, pair things together. Now the last bit, we have the C chord. Let's see if I can go through this myself. G chord, yeah. Yeah, so this is something too in here in this section. If I can get out of that. The fingering, you can almost get away with keeping the same fingering from chord to chord. So the C chord going to the F chord, you can keep the fingering that's from the beginning. The C chord, the way it's set up here. There's no fingering in these, but if you go into the score, if I can make this a little bit bigger. All right, it's back to that. So the fingering is there. It's very tiny. Let's go even enlarge it further. You can see the fingering now. Between the C chord and the F C chord, right? 3 stays where it is for the C chord, as well as the F/C. And then we have the pinky coming in onto that string to play through. 2 finger moves over to there for the F C chord. The 1 finger stays in place for both chords. So ring finger, index finger stay as they are between both chord changes. And then it's going to change with the G chord. But the G chord, I did ring finger pinky here, by the way. But in the score, it's a little different. It's actually set up in a different type of situation. If I go back to, no, let's go back to I had something going on before with this. Let's fix that real quick. All right, fit to width. Nope, I want it the other way. Okay, and I want it side by side from earlier. Fit width. It's not what I wanted. Anyways, the way I had it laid out before was perfect, actually. Let's see if I can get it back to where it was. Yeah, I had something before I want to. Let's see, horizontal. There we go. That's what I wanted. Okay, sorry. Didn't mean to delay that for a second. So the idea is when you get to this part of the tune, the fingerings change even further. Like right here, I actually use at 3rd fret, I use the ring finger. But here, I use the index finger to play that. So I kind of retained the shape of the G chord here with 1st finger, ring finger. And it's back to that again. Why is it doing that? So annoying. There we go. Let's hit that OK. Hopefully it saves it. So I decided to keep index finger, ring finger down for that part of the tune. So when I go through this part, let's hear it again. Now right in here, when I get to the B half diminished chord, I kept the fingering as 1, 3, 2, 4. So even though you have the fret numbers, sometimes you can get away with fingers and frets matching. This doesn't have that. So we have the 2nd fret with the index finger to play the B, the F's with the ring finger, the A with the middle finger, and the pinky plays the 3rd fret for the D note. Okay, so and then we keep that. We could keep that pinky there actually if you want to between that chord change. So there it is, another pairing where you may find something in that. So if I go into that chord. Now that's what's in the score, so it makes sense to leave the 1st finger and the pinky down because of what's happening in the score, the way the notes are being played. So these 2 fingers here, the middle and the ring finger, go away, you know, between the chord change, you know. That's written out in the score. Okay, so you can actually block the chords that way, play them as a group. Okay, so there's lots of really good things that happen within the score. So those are some of the things you may run across, like in terms of fingerings, things that make sense, things that are causing difficulties. So those are some things I can offer to you when you approach this score. And this is probably a little bit of a longer video, but I want to cover these details because it's something that as you play through the information, there's certain things that cause, I guess, a bit of friction in terms of the learning process of getting the material together. So these are things you can think about as you go through, especially in terms of arpeggios. There's all these fingering patterns to play arpeggios, and you know, there's minor and major finger chord arpeggios, you know, which form patterns to play up and down the neck, which is fine and good, but kind of going into a score like this where you're trying to be more creative rather than going through a patternized way of playing, the idea is to be able to create something and function as a player, you know, whether it's something you're going to write or if you're going to, you know, recreate a song you've heard. These are things, even with that, you may find that if you're playing through someone else's rendition of something, their fingering may not work for you. So these are all things to consider with going through this series of functional music theory. Is the functionality, you know, how is the information being presented functioning for me? Do I make changes? Do I keep it as it is? So I want to offer all this in one, you know, collective, you know, collection of information that hopefully you find helpful and interesting and allows you to, again, create or recreate. Okay, so I'm going to include the playthrough video that I posted recently at the end of this, so you can look for that at the end of the video and give it a whirl and see if you want to, you know, kind of up your technique a little bit, you know, or get some ideas perhaps from the next post. So there you go, guys. That's the long and long of it. Hopefully you found everything useful and helpful, and maybe I answered some questions in the meantime. So we'll see you guys on the next video. So thanks so much. And if you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.